Okay, City Council is back in session. Roll call, please.
Dingfelder. Here. Goods. Here. Maniscalco. Here. Citro. Miranda. Here. Carlson. Here. And Vieira.
Here. Okay. Let's begin. Go ahead, ma'am. And please state your name.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. My name is Barbara Bachman. I'm a resident at 3000 West Hawthorne Road, which is a property that directly is behind the proposed project. My husband and I had bought our first house on Hawthorne Road in 1984, so I've been a resident there for 35 years. Bob Humphreys, my late husband, and I built the house at 3000 Hawthorne Road because we loved the canopies of the trees. Hawthorne is a very unique street because the canopy of the trees go to the curb, so there's no sidewalks. There's a few sidewalks on newer homes where people have put them just in front of their sidewalks or in front of their houses. But the majority of the pedestrian traffic on the street, which is a large number of people with strollers, parents walking their children, kids on bikes, are accessing Bayshore on this street. One of my concerns, one of my largest concerns as a physician in the community is the lack of safety that this can present with this one of the most narrow streets in South Tampa with no sidewalks, and also the lack of parking requirement. I think they've calculated 1.2 cars per unit in their current recommendations. We know this is going to be a rental unit. This is going to be young professionals. There's not going to be 1.2 cars to each of these units. There's probably going to be 2. There's probably going to be more. There's going to be people that are having parties and having guests over because that's the nature of what this unit is going to provide. Where is that parking going to be? It's going to be around the corner on Hawthorne, up and down either the 2900, the 3000, the 3100 block of Hawthorne, all of which are narrow streets with no sidewalks, with heavy pedestrian traffic. I encourage each of you to go behind Yogurtology and make that turn onto that alleyway. The alleyway is extremely narrow. There's a retention pond behind Yogurtology, and then next to it is a wall of the private property. It's barely enough for one car. The egress is going to be at least 140 cars if they get their current density. I think the salient fact of this project is that this is too big for too little a piece of land. And I would agree that to have all these waivers and to have all these things that have to be done in order to meet the requirements implies that this is not the right development for this space. And I really appeal to the commission to look at this as being an inappropriate use. The term disruptive to neighborhood is used frequently in these previous zoning requirements. This is going to be highly disruptive to the adjacent properties, and I think it's an inappropriate zoning use and waivers for this particular project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Next, please, sir.
Hi, my name is Andres Prida. I live at 3004 Hawthorne Road. Me and my wife have lived there since 2003. We have a small child, or she's a teenager now. The traffic is a problem on Hawthorne. As my neighbor Barbara said, there hasn't been much talk about the parking waiver, but there's going to be 80 units, and the question is where they're going to park. There's no on-street parking on Gandy. Hawthorne Road is very narrow. You're going to have a narrow alley. You know, there's going to be at least 2 cars per unit, if not more. You know, they keep calling this project a mixed-use project. Less than 1% of the leasable square foot is going to be commercial space. That's not meeting the spirit of the city code, the comprehensive plan. You know, they constantly are asking for the waivers regarding landscaping. You know, the scale and the mass of this project it's huge. You know, we're going to have balconies in our backyard. This project is directly to the south of me on the property. You know, the Grand Oaks, you know, this is the canopy that's going to be irreplaceable. They're asking to pay into the fund, which, you know, doesn't benefit our neighborhood, which is all trees and canopy. Drive down Hawthorne Road. And when we met with the developer, they constantly, you know, they want to scare us. What McDonald's, you know, it's not going to be high, not going to be balconies looking in our yard. Is it a Village Inn? I mean, that they used a scare tactic every time we got with them. You know, we're dealing with this project, these waivers. at this time. And the use of the alley as a right-of-way, no one knows, I don't think from the drawings we've seen, how is the second floor parking deck accessed? To me, from the plans, it looks like it's gonna be from the alley. You're gonna have 70 trips up and down that. Every morning, Hawthorne stacks up. Their transportation consultants mentioned 4 to 6 p.m. But look at 7 to 9, when we're all taking our kids to school and going to work. McDill backs up. That's a concern. They didn't look at that. Another concern for me is the rooftop deck. What kind of noise, what kind of restrictions are you guys gonna have on this space? They're gonna be up there all night making noise. We all have children, school. I think with the type of property and the potential tenants, it's gonna be a loud atmosphere. And they're very concerned about the rooftop deck and the noise that's gonna potentially travel into my backyard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Ma'am?
Carol Guyton, 3015 Hawthorne Road. I live, fortunately, on the lesser conflicted side of the street. I came with a message. The things that I was going to point out, I have just posed more questions. So I have more questions than answers or thoughts in that they came to our meeting and told us certain things, and tonight I hear other things. And so I really want to know what's really happening. I don't feel that we have the truth, because they told us one thing when we met with them and another tonight.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Chair, Ms.
Mr.
Citro?
Citro?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Guyton? Just for the record, I was framed. I never messed with your watermelons. It's an inside joke.
You've
Mrs.
come a
Guyton.
long way, Mr. Citro.
Oh, thank you very much, Ms. Guyton. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir, I get it. Okay, rebuttal. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, ma'am.
Council, LaShawn, Planning and Development. There are a couple of items that I'd like to mention and put on the record, just based on testimony that's been provided. So one is that this application was submitted, and the site plan and application has been reviewed under the old tree code. It was not reviewed under the new tree code. The other item of concern that I'd just like to clarify, the redesign proposed of the alley, the redesigning of the alley was reviewed by one department, transportation. It has not been reviewed by any other department, not solid waste. No other department has had a chance to review it. So I'd like to get that on the record. The other item is the loading space to the north of the site. So if it is council's direction to have the loading space placed back on the site, I'd like to have, we have transportation staff here. Jonathan Scott is here, and he can provide testimony as to why the loading space was asked to be removed in the beginning of the site.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, council?
Anyone have any questions? Councilman Dingfelder?
Clarify what you said about the loading space, because you got 80 units. Where is the loading going to occur? I'm not asking Mr. Bentley, I'm asking staff. Thank you. Sorry, Mark, I thought you were heading toward the podium. I thought you were heading toward the podium.
Jonathan Scott, Transportation Planning. This site, since it's a residential multifamily, only requires 1 per 100,000 square foot of loading spaces. So since it's less than 100,000, they're technically not required to have a loading space. That's why we had to take that off the site plan. And that one that they were showing on the alley didn't meet our technical requirements, is the reason why we didn't have them put that on. But they still have to address the move in and move outs, and that is something they'll have to do. And I think
Isn't that what a site plan's for?
that's something they have to address. Yeah, but technically our code doesn't require them to have a loading space since they're less than 100,000 square feet. But they still have to address the move in and move outs, certainly.
you sort of said we don't require it, but they still need to show it, and I'm trying to jibe those two.
They still have to address move in and move outs, but we asked them to take off that loading space off the alley because it didn't meet any of our technical requirements.
Okay,
That
so if
makes
we're gonna
sense.
take it off the alley, where are we putting it? On the,
They're not, by our code, they're not required to have a loading space. But they still have to address their move in and move outs, of course. But they don't have to show a loading space on their site plan.
Council LaShonda, Planning and Development, if I may. So the applicant had a loading space identified on the site plan. It did not meet transportation technical standards by size and maneuvering. So they were requested to remove it off the site plan. If the request tonight is to put the loading space back on, they have to show how that standard can be met. At last submittal, it should be removed off the site plan. That's what was requested from Transportation Department because it does not meet that standard. And what he's asking for is them to show proof that it will function instead of identifying it on the plan with a dimension.
so, but if this councilman, demands something that the code doesn't allow me to demand, then Ms. Kurt's gonna have a problem with that.
Then they
So-
would need, that's something that they could not revise between first and second reading. It would need to have further review from staff
Ms. Kurt,
if
any
they were to place a
suggestions?
loading space.
Rebecca Kurt, Legal Department. No. I don't have an exact one. I mean, I think what I hear staff saying is that the concern of this building requiring, it doesn't technically require a loading space. However, there's an acknowledgement that the issue you raised could have an impact on adjoining properties if it wasn't somehow shown that they were addressing it in some way. But they're not required to show a loading space, but maybe they could explain how they expect those situations in the rebuttal. They could address how they expect those situations to be addressed with the site plan that they have and see if that addresses a concern. Rebecca Hurt, Legal Department. I do have one other clarification that I just wanted to make. There was a lot of discussion about the alley and resubmitting a configuration and whether or not that needed to be reviewed by additional departments. The revision sheet that staff submitted to you has a statement that all activity in the right-of-way will have to go through the normal permitting process. That's how we permit things in the right-of-way. You don't permit it through your rezoning process. So that would be the appropriate process. The reason everyone's talking about the alley is because that there are some trees in the alley. The tree table that has been submitted to you for a review does not show the alley trees being removed. So I'm not testifying, that's in the record, I'm just reiterating that. For the developer to remove those trees, they would have to be shown on the tree table. So those trees are already required to be saved. I do want to clarify that they are right-of-way trees, and while the developer, under this site plan as shown, does not have the ability to remove them, there's not a guarantee that at some point Natural Resources or whoever's allowed to, under our new tree code, remove them. They could potentially be removed in the future, but this site plan in and of itself does not allow the developer to remove the trees.
Okay. And if I may, Councilman Carlson, did you have a question, sir? Okay, thank you. Mr. Shelby.
Mr. Bentley, are you about to go into rebuttal now?
With Chair's permission, sure.
Well, I was wondering because you and I had a discussion about items you wanted submitted into the record. Would you like to do that at this time?
Yes, please, Ashley.
Are they all things that had been raised or
These
discussed?
are various reports prepared by consultants. Some of the documents that are already in the record are the file for this application. And, yeah, and some of their resumes, et cetera. But
so is this all based then on the testimony? There are no experts in here that you're submitting that have not testified, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
We have a motion to receive and file by Councilman Miranda, a second by Councilman Citro. All in favor? Any opposed? And Mr. Bentley, before you begin, if I may, Councilman Goods has a question.
Legal.
For legal. Ms. Kurt, please.
Ms. Kurt? want to make sure I have it down pat. We have a tree code that the petitioner originally fell under. Now we have a new tree code. How is that going to intertwine with that now?
Rebecca Kurt, Legal Department. It is my understanding that when the applicant came in, he was under the old tree code, so it was reviewed under the old tree code. I brought that up, or Ms. Dock clarified that, because there was some discussion from the petitioners about how the new code would apply. Well, they didn't ask to have the new code applied. They could probably at this point say, hey, I'd rather have the new code applied. It would require a continuance, and we would review it under the new code. So I just want it clarified for the record that this was reviewed under the old code. Now, if you're asking whether or not there's any substantive difference, there most likely would not be in the form of, they still are going to have to ask for these tree waivers. There's a potential that the mitigation, which is a large part of what the change is between the old tree code and the new tree code, could change. And it was also testified to earlier that at the permitting process, some of these decisions are made at the permitting process. Like if they have to replace trees, we used to have very stringent things that had to be on your premise and on your property, and now we allow some leeway in that. But because that's determined at the permitting process, which is in the future, they could probably take advantage of that. But it's just important to clarify for the record that arguments based upon the new code allowing certain trees to come out and certain trees not to come out isn't really reflective of what happened here, because it was reviewed under the old tree code. And to review it under the new tree code, they could have done that because it's in place now, but it would require a continuance to evaluate it under that, and it wasn't.
All right, I just making a decision. Just want to make sure I have that down pat on that.
I wasn't trying to overcomplicate it, but I did want that, in case we do end up in litigation, I think it's important just to have the facts clear on that.
Thank you. And now, Mr. Citro, I think has a
Councilman
question.
Goods and Ms. Kurt, thank you for clarifying the question that was hard for me to ask earlier. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Bentley,
Okay.
rebuttal.
Hey, thanks again, Council. Appreciate it. Concerning this loading area, here's a site plan before you. It says 10 by 30 loading berth. Okay? And if you look at your waiver sheet, we requested a waiver based on staff's recommendation from the loading berth. And our waiver was to go from 12 by 30 to 10 by 30. So we're committed to this loading berth, and the only difference between code is 2 feet. 12 by 30 versus 10 by 30. Okay? So we have the loading area. That's resolved. Second,
Let Mr. Carlson ask a question, if you could
I'm
turn it
sorry.
off, sir. Thank you. Go ahead.
I wonder if we could ask transportation. Can we ask transportation? Why,
Sure.
So you said it's 2 feet different.
Correct.
2 feet. Why, do you all have a hard rule that it has to be 10 by 30 instead, or 12 by 30 instead of 10 by 30?
Jonathan Scott, Transportation Planning. That loading space really didn't meet any of our technical requirements, even though they only built 2 feet less or whatever. I mean, it doesn't make sense to get in and get out of it, and how are the doors open and all that stuff. It's more than just the size of it. For the reason we had them take it off. But like typically a loading space would be a 12 by 60 would be the first one, and then the 12 by 30 would be allowed if you did a second one for a smaller one. And sometimes people do ask for waivers, but in this case it doesn't make sense to have one off the alley like that to meet any of our technical requirements.
Sure. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Anyone else?
next issue, here's the site
Oh,
plan.
and I'm sorry, Councilman Miranda.
About 2 feet, but it's 2 feet times whatever the length is.
No, it's actually the length is still is by 30. And instead of being 12 by 30, it's 10 by 30.
And then it's what, 30 square feet?
No, lineal feet.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's lineal feet, Councilman. Okay. Second issue, there was a suggestion by Ms. Mandel that things have changed, et cetera. Here's the site plan before you. See this box here? These are the trees behind the Sevier property. And Mr. Key, who testified a little while ago about his view, and see that box around those trees in the alley? And you heard testimony from your staff, we can't remove those anyhow. But if you look at the site plan, that box says trees to be saved, subject to transportation decision on that. So, and concerning Mr. Prida's concern about the outdoor deck, we actually told the residents when we had our meeting with them that the deck would be shifted to Gandy Boulevard, and we did that on the plan that's before you. So it's over here about 130 feet away from the residents. This issue about the density of the project or intensity, once you commit to mixed use, and the Planning Commission makes a determination that you fulfill that obligation because there are two different uses under the city's use schedule. It says on page 2 of your staff report, the site would be eligible for a 1.5 FAR by right, not discretionary. Our FAR is 1.26, so we qualify there. Here's Mr. Key's property. Ironically, we use this as an example in Adam's presentation. He didn't have a chance to really get through it too much. Here's a view of Mr. Key's property looking toward the project. You can see the foliage or the trees that he has in his backyard. And you can see this little keyhole in Mr. Key, all this vegetation. And what we did, and this is a condition here, we have to put screening in anyhow, but we agreed that we would put screening that was over twice the code requirement for these red cedars. So what we've done is identify, for example, Mr. Key's property, these red cedars would be planted. They're 20 feet tall and 65 gallons at time of planting.
And if I may, Councilman Miranda, is this still responsive to your question? I would assume. Oh, okay. Okay, well then, let's start the clock.
Okay. And then it goes without saying, once again, the CG and the implications of developing this property, CG, everyone's going to have the same challenges with the trees. I want council to know if you develop at CG, and like I said, you could put theoretically 90,000 square feet here and multi-story, and the height, 20 feet from their property would be 45 feet, okay? There's no tiering, there's no sensitivity, there's no buffering, things like that. All they'd have to have is a 10-foot buffer with some vegetation, and there's already a wall there, and that's the end of that story, okay? So I think we've really gone above and beyond to be sensitive to this issue of view. In terms of tree removal, a lot of these trees, and Joe was trying to impress upon this, is that there's 26 of the 57 palms, or 26 of the 57 trees are palms, okay? And a lot of these trees, these trailers and pads and things have grown on them and compacted upon them, so it'd be a real challenge even just to forget about taking the mobile homes out, okay, just for the survivability of these trees once we take all that stuff out. And we're ready, willing, and able to plant as many trees as we can on the property. Now, in terms of transportation, that's been an ongoing issue, Mike. This is Mike Yates again, our transportation engineer.
Hello, Michael Yates. I want to address a couple of things that got brought up. First is the trip generation for the project. As you can see, the project will only generate 29 AM peak hour trip-ins and 38 PM peak hour trip-ins. So a very low trip generator. The second is the site circulation. There's a lot of discussion about the use of Hawthorne for the project traffic. What we're proposing is a right-in, right-out access on Gandy Boulevard, and then the existing Zion access would be improved, but that would be a full access to Gandy Boulevard. And then we would use the access to McDill for inbound traffic only. So this driveway to the alley to the back would be inbound traffic, and then the outbound traffic would only be able to make a right out. In our site plan, we've put a traffic separator in there to force everyone to the east. We've ran intersection analysis. They all operate acceptable level of service. Both the McDill and the Zion access work at acceptable level of service, as well as the intersections of Gandy and McDill and Gandy and Bayshore. This is during the AM and PM peak hour.
Yeah, and this suggestion that, and here again, most of these units are one-bedroom units, but you have the same parking requirement for 1 and 2 bedroom under the zoning code. So we feel we have sufficient parking. Also, in this issue, the waivers, a lot of times these numbers get kicked around. I think we've whittled it down at this point to 9 waivers. And let me point out to you, council, that waivers 6, 7, and 8, these relate solely to decorative walls around the project or a lack of a wall next to Yogurtology on the west side that already has a wall. So we asked for a waiver, why have 2 masonry walls? So once you deduct the wall waivers, you're down to 6, and we have the 4 grand trees we spoke about, the 50% tree retention, and then in tandem with any one of these percentages, if you have to make a contribution, so that constitutes another waiver. Then we have waiver in terms of the green space per apartment. It's supposed to be 350, and we got it down to 287 plus. In combination with that, you'd have to pay in lieu for the balance, the 80 square feet that you couldn't provide on site. So it's not a lot of waivers. In each one of these waivers, when you pay in, it's kind of duplicative. So there's 6 waivers associated with the project. So I think we've done everything we can. We've had multiple meetings over the last several months with the neighbors. I haven't mentioned it, and hopefully you've had the opportunity to read all these letters I've been filtering to your office. We have the Hawthorne Pond Condo Association. You heard one gentleman testify that they're in support. Multiple businesses up and down Gandy and a lot of residents have sent in letters of support too. So it's just not kind of a one-way street. And also, quite honestly, some of these residents who testified on Hawthorne, they live either to the east of the project or on the north side, and clearly on the north side of Hawthorne, you don't even have the ability to view our property. So thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you, sir. Any questions from council? Mr. Dingfelder.
Yeah, Mr. Bentley.
Yes, sir.
A few questions for staff, but before I do, there's been several references to the existing zoning, CG, commercial general. Okay. Why not just use that?
You can't, because what they do is they apply RM24 standards, and when you do the math in terms of number of units, you get somewhere in the range of like, and don't hold me to it, okay, like 35 to 50 units, something like that. And you don't have the ability to get any waivers or any kind of design modifications. You know, you're kind of pigeonholed into the dimensional requirements of the CG. So we couldn't get the density or intensity under CG.
But you arguably, you just said, and I will hold you to it, or get an expert up here to tell me what the answer is, that under the CG, I guess using the floor area ratio with the CG, or however you calculate the number of units for the CG, how many units do you end up with?
Under CG?
Yeah.
For multifamily?
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you.
Well, have somebody tell me, because it's an important question. You had Adam Carnegie there.
Maybe Adam can, but.
And this happened in a previous, this is Adam Carnegie for the record.
I mean, you're asking for the PD, which is an alternative to the CG.
Sure.
Okay, so what I'm saying is tell me why the CG is no good. How many units can you get under the CG?
Yeah. With the CG, you have to hold to RM24 standards, but also, I think as Ms. Dock would confirm, you are held to the comprehensive plan's density with respect to multifamily units. So if you can dimensionally fit them in, it's 35 units per acre, CMU 35, so 1.76 times 35 would be not 70, that would be 2.0. Isn't that right, David?
I'm getting,
Yeah.
David Hay, Planning Commission staff, because you only get a 30 by right.
30 by right.
30 by right under the community mixed use 35. The 1.76 acres would get you 52 units.
52 units.
52 units under 30 dwelling units per acre.
Okay. Thank you, David. Do you concur with that, Mr. Carnegie?
Yes, that is the maximum one could apply for. But remember, you would have to meet all the requirements that we are here being able to seek adjustments from, waivers and so on. And we've already pointed out, for example, Mr. Dingfelder, that the trees that are there right now, which we would have to maintain as is, would absolutely prohibit it. So we could not, in actuality, build.
You made a presumption. There is an alternative method, which is the variance review board. I'm just saying, if you had the CG, which you do, you have the CG today, or your client does. If you have the CG and you want to remove more than 50% of the trees, then you go to the VRB, correct?
Yes, you can certainly do that, but with respect to things like, the additional parking and all of those, it's not just one waiver with respect to trees. There are many, many things that we are here providing a single, comprehensive, cohesive package to get approval for. And so my response to you is, isn't this a much better process to look at this holistically?
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Anything further from council? Questions? No further questions from council?
For the petitioner?
Or for
anybody?
For the petitioner, staff, anyone?
LaShawn Dock, Planning and Development. Council, Mr. Bentley provided a zoning condition. Did you submit this paragraph? The commitment to provide the screening along the north. If that is a desire of the applicant, and to provide that as screening for the residents that are located to the north, we would need to have this submitted in addition to the site plan revisions sheet that was submitted to you in the record.
This is the screening I alluded
For the
to
note.
from Mr. Key's house. That condition relates to those red cedars at 20 feet at time of planting. Right
So
there.
I will provide this to you, and that will be added to the site plan revision. So you have a
Councilman
blank copy.
Carlson.
Several, could I ask you one question? Several folks, sorry, I'm getting tired here. Several folks said that there were conditions that were mentioned tonight that maybe aren't written down somewhere. Are there other conditions that haven't been documented yet?
No. Mr. Carlson, for example, that condition, that there's already an implied code requirement. We provide planting like a red cedar. The code gives an example, but it says it only has to be 35 gallons at time of planting, and there's no minimum height. So what we did is said, we want to take it up a notch to ensure that there's some mitigation of the view. So we've agreed to 65 gallon at time of planting and 20 feet. But it was already required, we just amped it up,
Any further questions from council? Okay, thank you. Mr. Shelby.
If there's no other testimony and Mr. Bentley feels the need for a final word, I would ask that he have that opportunity. Is there anything else you wish to add?
No, just one final thing is, I talked early on, there's been so much information, is that according to traffic engineer, whether you have 80 units or 50 at the PM peak, I think there's a 23 trip difference. So it's insignificant. You wouldn't know the difference in terms of traffic impact between 80 or 50 units from a traffic standpoint. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Can I just add?
Sure, and we'll give you 1 minute. Is that okay?
Thank you very much. Ruslan Feredenko back here. Sorry. What I want to just add is, I came here, obviously I'm an immigrant. I'm a US citizen now, so I came from the country where sometimes law doesn't abide there. You can go different ways. And I was hoping here is, for certain things, if it's, I know a lot of people say, or if it's just 500 square feet of mixed use, but if it's in law, I was hoping you guys were able to interpret the law the right way. Versus if we have a right to build on certain things by the law, I am just hoping you look into that and not just thinking, just go with emotion with some of the neighbors. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Okay. Does council wish to have discussion before thoughts, opinions?
I do.
Councilman Dingfelder.
Before we close, I'd like to ask, I guess, Ms. Dock or Ms. Kurt, a question related to this 700-foot office space that somehow or another translates, which somebody has said is less than 1% of the whole project, which somehow bumps this up into now being called a mixed use.
Yes. LaShawn,
And it's, I find it a little incredulous and a little hard to believe that that is the intent of the code, to make that mixed use.
I'll let David speak to this in the comprehensive plan.
Good evening, David.
I mean, why 700 feet? Why not 10 feet? 10 foot, not 10 foot's ridiculous. Okay, 20-foot office, okay? Why shouldn't that be a mixed use, David?
Under your mixed use categories, especially the community commercial and the community mixed use 35, there's a provision that along these mixed use within the mixed use categories, developments that include two uses from two different land use tables within the LDC can be considered for a bump up. That came as a plan amendment about 3 years ago to the previous council. The city staff, in cooperation with planning commission staff, was looking at the encouragement of mixed use. Before, there was no requirement at all. There still is not a requirement for a mixture of use. But before that, there was no incentive or anything to have mixed use on these identified corridors. It was city staff and planning commission staff that came up with to encourage a mixture of uses on these corridors to come up with this incentive. Basically, all the categories were capped. If any development was capped at a 1 FAR, and then you could bonus your way up to a 2 FAR. If you meet the requirements to contain a mixture of uses in your structure, you get that bump up to a 1.5 by right, and then you can still buy up to the 2 FAR through the bonus provisions in the Land Development Code. So the thinking is that this is the type development pattern that the comp plan encourages on these particular corridors, a mixture of uses. There is no minimum, though, within the comp plan categories of what makes a mixed use. It's just the inclusion of the two.
So it could be a 20 square foot office and still be allowed.
I would, technically by the comp plan, yes, that could be up to your interpretation though, because if to utilize that, they always have to come as a PD. They can't utilize that through a Euclidean zoning district.
Well, what part is left to our discretion? I mean, if you're saying, I don't understand that then. If you're saying we have discretion to reject the notion that 700 square feet is enough to bump this into a mixed use?
There's no minimum within the comprehensive plan, but if there's other factors, that's up to your interpretation.
Ms. Kurt?
Rebecca Kurt, Legal Department. What David said is completely correct. That gives them an entitlement to justify up to a maximum of that. It changes the maximum, but they're still required to demonstrate compliance with 27-136, which is the purpose, which we'll find of a PD site plan, which is found on page 8 of your staff report, which is where City Council can still find that what is being requested, you don't have to allow the maximum if they don't otherwise meet 27-136. That changes, that comprehensive plan provision changes the maximum that is allowed. They also still have to meet 27-139 for waivers for every waiver that is requested, and that's in your staff report on page 10. So I hope that clarified. That changes the maximum that's allowed, but it does not mean that they still don't have to meet all the other provisions that are required for a site plan zoning district.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir. Anyone else? Okay. Mr. Goods, Councilman Goods.
It's kind of hard sometimes to make a decision when it seems like you don't have all of the facts. And just to me, it's like I'm missing facts. I'm missing things that saying things were submitted, but we didn't get it done in time to get it into the record, get it to us, and decisions on, I just don't think that we have a completed file here. Ms. Kurt, I just don't think we have a completed file.
Rebecca Kurt, Legal Department. That goes to the heart of the question of where we are with the evidence that has been submitted. Who is the burden and where we are in the burden shifting process? The applicant has the burden to demonstrate that they are in compliance with the comprehensive plan and the land development code section, land development code. If they have not submitted enough information to demonstrate that to you, and you can figure out what code, and you can identify the code provisions that you feel you don't have enough information to meet, that's grounds for denial. If the applicant has met that and you would like additional information, that's not grounds for denial. Because once the applicant has met their burden, the burden shifts to whoever is objecting to it, be it staff or be it the community, to present evidence to you. So if the applicant has met their burden and there's not enough evidence for you to deny it, you don't have a basis to deny it. But if what you're saying is you don't have enough information, the applicant has not provided you enough information to determine whether or not they're in compliance with the code, then you're basically saying that the applicant has not met their burden. So that's where it's really important to figure out where the gap is. Is the gap like, I'd like more information because maybe there's a problem out there that no one's presented to me, but the applicant has met their burden? Then the applicant's met their burden.
Mr. Carlson, yes, sir.
There's no third option, right? We can't say come back and bring more information another time. It's either we vote yes or no. Is that right?
Well, the applicant has the ability to say, I'd like a continuance to provide you with more information if they feel that's appropriate. But if the applicant is like, I have met my record and I'd like a vote up or down, then they're entitled to a vote up or down in determination of whether or not they met their burden. And remember, the applicant does have the burden initially to demonstrate compliance.
But that's up to the applicant if he chooses to have a continuance.
Yes.
Anything further from council? Okay. Mr. Shelby.
Don't like to do this necessarily, but when council asks a question and takes testimony from staff, we need to have the petitioner have the last word.
Sure.
Short as council wants to give it.
I hear you. Let's give you 1 minute to the extent you wish to use it,
Okay.
sir. Is that reasonable for you, Mr.
Yeah,
Bennett?
that's fine. Thank you
Great.
very much.
Yes, sir.
Okay. In terms of the information, Councilman Gooch, you indicated like there was a supplemental report to be filed. That was filed 2 weeks ago, and that's the only thing in the staff report that says they haven't weighed in on completely. The intent of that report, it was a tree limb analysis pruning report, was to confirm what the findings were between the staff and our arborist out in the field. We supplied that 2 weeks ago. If you look at your staff report, it says our obligation was to supply it between first and second reading, the implication being that the staff would have plenty of time. I'd also like to point out to council that there's really no substantial competent evidence that you've heard tonight. You haven't heard any expert testimony from the other side of the fence, and Ms. Mandel's involvement is just purely legal argument. She's not competent to testify concerning compatibility, traffic, things like that. So again, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Okay, do I suspect the motion to close is coming soon? Okay, we have a motion to close by Councilman Maniscalco, a second by Councilman Goods. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay. Now, traditionally, the chair always asks somebody to read. On matters where there's been a lot of dispute, I typically ask what is the pleasure of council, just to allow folks to proceed as they wish. So I will hereby say, what is the pleasure of council? Councilman Maniscalco.
All right, I have an ordinance being presented for first reading consideration, an ordinance rezoning property in the general vicinity of 3011 West Gandy Boulevard in the city of Tampa, Florida, and more particularly described in section 1 from zoning district classification CG commercial to PD plan development residential multifamily business professional office, and including the revision sheet providing an effective date.
Okay, there being no second, the motion dies. What is the pleasure of council?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir. Councilman Dingfelder.
All right. I'm going to move to deny the petition. I was hoping to hear Mr. Bentley come up to the microphone and ask for continuance to continue to tweak this up, and I think he had plenty of opportunity to do that and didn't. One of the reasons that I feel comfortable in moving to deny is based upon the fact that this property has an existing zoning on it of CG, commercial general, which by the testimony of our own land use staff, as concurred to by the testimony of Mr. Carnegie, the petitioner's land use expert, indicated how many units? 52 units under the CG, and there was no objection on that number. So I believe that right now there exists a reasonable use for that property, and I say that with great emphasis for the record. And that's not my conclusion, that's the conclusion of experts who testified in front of us today. I think that's extremely important because, as Ms. Kurt reminds us regularly, Mr. Shelby reminds us regularly, when we're denying a petition, we have to make sure that there's still reasonable use remaining on the property. And that reasonable use is already there in the form of the CG. So, the reason I moved to deny is the fact that I don't believe, based upon our staff report, that they've met the standards for the PD. Specifically, our natural resources staff indicates that the petition is inconsistent, and I'll just, if allowed by Mr. Shelby, without rereading all of these, specifically I'll incorporate the staff report by reference. I'll summarize the end of the natural resources staff report by indicating that the project is inconsistent because of the multiple waivers requested, including section 13-45, the removal of non-hazardous grand trees. I'm not sure if it was 4 of them or 8 of them, but it was many of them. The reduction in multifamily green space, and an increase of the, a request for an increase of the 50% tree retention to somewhere between 91 and 94%. So that's extremely important. And the petitioner and his legal staff, as well as his planning staff, recognized that with the CG use, they could go to try and get those trees removed through the variance review board process. So it's not like we're just shutting them out completely. They have an existing zoning that allows 52 units, and they have an alternative process through the variance review board to get those trees removed. In addition, I'll move to deny on the basis of the transportation report. The transportation staff indicates that 148 parking spaces are required and only 138 are provided in the site plan, which is a 7% reduction. As testified by various folks, and also just logic, that project is on Gandy. There's no on-street parking on Gandy. If there's overflow, I think the next adjacent street, which is Hawthorne, has reason to be concerned that people might park on Hawthorne and then walk around, and that's problematic. Personally, I did drive this property yesterday. Mr. Miranda suggested that that's always a good idea, especially on controversial projects. So I went and drove it, and I circled around that alley 3 different times. Pretty soon the workers were kind of looking at me, what was I doing there? but I became very familiar with the alley and with the concerns of the Hawthorne folks just by driving the site. Additionally, there was a concern raised by transportation staff about the loading zone. Staff indicates we can't require loading space, but the petitioner really doesn't show where a reasonable loading area would be that would not negatively impact the Hawthorne neighbors. Personally, I raised a concern about the dumpster and the noise from the dumpster. They didn't have a good solution to that. They just said, yeah, we're going to roll out dumpsters out into the alley, and that's just the way it is, and we're not really sure what time that would happen, you know, what time of day. So to me, that creates a potential noise problem. As stated earlier, I don't believe that they meet the intent and that they don't satisfactorily meet section 27-136, specifically in the staff report. Again, the staff report specifically references the removal of eight healthy grand trees and more than 50% of the trees on site. Let me see if there's anything else. Oh, yeah. Ms. Mandel, in her correspondence to us, speaks to the massing and scale of the development, which I agree with. I think the massing, they'd like to have 80 units, but by right today they could do 52 units. Perhaps the 80 unit structure is just too large and too massive for the property. And I believe that's one of the reasons that, that we heard testimony in opposition to this. The density of the project is too dense for this approximately 1.7 acres. There wasn't any great justification at all for the parking waiver. The roof amenity, Mr. Bentley addressed it and testified to it, but Mr. Bentley's not a land use expert. He's a great lawyer, but not a land use expert. So I didn't really hear much in the way of testimony that roof amenity was actually going to be moved or was moved. So that's my long-winded motion to deny, and I'm glad to accept any friendly amendments.
And before, if I may, I remember our friend Chairman Reddick would always do this before. Mr. Shelby, is everything there good, so to speak, for a valid denial? I just say that out of an abundance of caution.
In an abundance of caution, Mr. Chairman, what Mr. Dingfelder did do was he cited the general standards, section 27-136. He, prior to doing that, also referenced findings of fact in the staff report, and as he was talking, he was making certain findings of fact, it appears. The question then is, looking at section 136 and looking at the subsections that are in the staff report, numbers 1 through 7, if any other person wishes to add anything as to whether the competent substantial evidence supports or rejects the requirements of approving a PD. Also, to refer you again to Ms. Kurt's reminder that there are also waivers requested. That subsection 27-139 sub 4, that criteria is in your staff report, but that was not referenced in the motion, and I just want to bring that to council's attention if it wishes to do so. But that is, again, that's totally council's purview.
And I just make it a habit of checking.
And I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. Let me
yes, sir.
let me add on a little bit, and I appreciate that, Mr. Shelby. You make a good point as related to section 27-139 paren 4, which speaks to waivers, and it gives us some guidance as to waivers. It says the following are the criteria for consideration of a waiver through the site plan controlled rezoning. And I'll jump to B, which says the waiver, if allowed, will not substantially interfere with or injure the rights of others whose property would be affected by allowance of the waiver. And I think we've heard competent, substantial evidence to the contrary, that if we allowed these 9 waivers, especially the ones I mentioned, that they would substantially interfere with and injure the rights of others whose property would be affected by allowance of the waiver. I would also argue C, that the waiver is not in harmony, the waivers, or various waivers are not in harmony with the general intent and purpose of the chapter, the land development regulations and the Tampa Comprehensive Plan, and that I do believe that allowing the various waivers would do substantial injustice considering the public benefits versus the private issues and individual hardships. So thank you for your legal advice.
Okay, and Councilman Citro, I think you said you wanted to make you sure? Okay. Okay, we have a motion by Councilman Dingfelder. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Councilman Dingfelder, a second by Councilman Citro. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed?
Motion to deny passed with Maniscalco voting no.
Okay, next we go to item 11.
LaShawn Dock, Planning and Development. Council, item number 11 is REZ 1940. It's for the property located at 2904 North Ola Avenue. The request is from RS50 to PD, detached single-family residential. The applicant is the owner of the property, Nicholas Jamal.
Good evening, council members. David Hay with your Planning Commission staff. I have been sworn. We end this evening in the Central Tampa Planning District, more specifically the Tampa Heights Urban Village. There is transit within 800 feet of the subject site on West Columbus Drive. That's West Columbus Drive is served by Route 15. Closest public recreation facility is Plymouth Playground, which is located approximately 950 feet to the north of the subject site, and the site is not located within an evacuation zone. On to the aerial. Here's the subject site. This is Ola. We have Warren to the south. This is the DW Waters Center to the southeast. And then you've got the Villa Madonna to the southwest. You've got Graham Elementary to the northwest. And then you can see there's a mixture of duplexes and single-family detached, mostly single-family detached to the north of the subject site. On to the future land use map. The subject site and properties surrounding it in that tan color are all the residential 10. As you go further south, it starts getting a little more dense in character with the residential 20. The blue represents the public, quasi-public with those uses I mentioned previously. And then down on Columbus, you have the community mixed use 35 in the pink. You've got community commercial 35 running up and down Florida Avenue, represented by the red. And then it actually goes into residential 35 south of Columbus Drive. Residential developed parcels adjacent to North Ola Avenue between, it's a weird street name, West Street and West Glade Street. I checked with Jimmy Cook too, that's the right name. Excluding the subject site, have an existing density of 8.2 units per acre. The proposed rezoning would allow consideration of 2 single-family detached dwelling units on the subject site with an overall density of 5.9 dwelling units per acre, which is consistent with that residential 10 future land use category. The proposed PD will be of similar form, height, and scale of the surrounding residential uses, and the proposal will not alter the character or the existing development pattern found within this portion of the Tampa Heights neighborhood. And based on those considerations, the Planning Commission staff recommends to you this evening that this rezoning, this plan development, be found consistent with the Imagine 2040 Tampa Comprehensive Plan.
Thank you.
LaShawn Dodd, Planning and Development. And council, this property is currently zoned RS50 residential single family. The request is to a PD plan development for single family residential detached use. So this would allow for the 2 single family detached residential lots. This subject site is a part of the plat of CR Pittman subdivision. It's lots 3 and 4. So these lots, this is the conforming map. And so this is Ola Avenue. This is Warren Keys Avenue is here. This is the site that's highlighted here in the stripes. And so this site is located currently in the RS50 zoning. You see there's a couple of RM designations, one to the north and then south of the site. In this particular map, these lots that are just north of the site are the lots that are measuring. They're over 45 feet and they are less than 50. So they're between 45 to 49 feet in width, the lots that are immediately north. And then they increase slowly to 50 to 54 feet further north in the darker blue. So the lots 3 and 4, they're platted as followed. Lot 3 is 45 feet wide and lot 4 is platted at 44 feet wide. Both lots were platted at 167 feet of depth. So they're deep, they just don't have the width. This request would create the 2 buildable single-family residential lots with the lot area for lot 3 at 7,515 square feet and lot 4 at 7,348 square feet. The minimum lot width for RS50 is 50 feet, so this would allow them to develop at that minimum width under the RS50 standard, which is less than the RS50 standard. This is the zoning map. And this is the site located here with the green stripes. So this is Ola Avenue. This is Warren. So this site is located in the northwest corner of Ola and Warren intersection. It's surrounded with residential uses to the north and to the east. To the south is vacant, but it is residential, and west is also residential. This is the aerial for the property. This is the property outlined in red. This is Ola, and this is Warren. And then I have pictures of the site and the surrounding area. So this is a picture of the site on Ola. That's looking west. That's the view looking north on Ola. And that's north of the site. Single-family residential northeast on Ola. This will be the view directly across from the site. This is east of the site, so that's the side view of this structure, which is at the corner of Ola and Warren. And then this is the view looking east on Warren. And then as we go around, we have the southeast view. That's to the southeast. Swing back around to the south. And then this is west of the site, so this is on the opposite street, which is on Nevada. The DRC staff has reviewed the application, finds the request consistent with applicable land development regulations. In the event City Council approves this application, site plan modifications are required between first and second reading, and those revisions are provided in the staff report on page 9.
And can we have any questions from council?
Okay, thank you.
You might have mentioned this, Doc. Are these subject to design standards? Is it in a district that's design standard controlled?
This request is a PD, so it's a plan development. So it would be subject to what is approved under this PD standards. It's not under a RS50 standard.
No, I don't mean that. I meant like a Tampa Heights design look, you know, those types of standards.
Oh, like if it was in an overlay, or it is not.
It's not, okay.
It is not. No additional standards are required.
Okay.
Okay, anyone else? Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Petitioner, please.
Move to close. Oh, I'm sorry.
Good evening, City Council. Nicholas Jamal, 1910 West Kennedy Boulevard, Tampa, Florida, 33606. I have not been sworn in yet.
Thank you for your honesty.
I do.
Go ahead, sir.
Okay, so we're not asking for any waivers, and the project is very consistent with the surrounding area, and staff has found it to be consistent with code and the surrounding uses. So we're respectfully asking for your approval tonight.
Any questions from council? Okay, thank you, sir. Yes, sir, Councilman Dingfeld. Oh, I'm sorry. And thank you, sir. Anyone here from the public here to speak on item 11 at 11:31 p.m.?
Now I move to close.
Move to close.
We have a motion to close by Councilman Miranda, second by Councilman Goods. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, I don't know where we're at, so what's the pleasure of council?
I got it. I have an ordinance being presented for first reading consideration, an ordinance rezoning property in the general vicinity of 2904 North Ola Avenue in the city of Tampa, Florida, and more particularly described in section 1 from zoning district classification RS50, residential single family, to PD plan development, residential single family detached, providing an effective date.
We have a motion by Councilman Escapo, a second by Councilman Dingfelder. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you, sir.
Motion carried unanimously. Second reading and adoption to be held on July 18th, 2019 at 9:30 a.m.
Next, we go to staff reports and unfinished business. Item
That's it.
12.
Item 12.
Mr. Carlson. No, you're very much.
Just move
No,
it.
all you have to do is move, well, the
I
question
have a quick, and gosh darn it, guys, I know it's 11:32, I apologize. I know, Councilman Carlson, if I may, I just wanted to, because I want to vote for this. And by the way, did you want to introduce anything before I speak, sir? And I appreciate it.
If I can, for the purposes of the people at home, they may not know what the agenda item subject matter is, so you may
Okay.
want to just give
Councilman, go ahead, sir.
a sentence or two.
A resolution to oppose the president's order that prohibits people from U.S. citizens from traveling to Cuba, which will hurt. The resolution talks about how that will hurt the port and the airport in Tampa, which will cost jobs, and it hurts capitalism and entrepreneurs in Cuba, and hurts the economic freedom of the Cuban people. But more importantly, it takes away the rights and freedoms of Americans, and so we object to it for that reason. Yes.
And I agree with every word you said, sir. I just wanted to, I've always believed that openness with Cuba is not only about dollars and cents, it's also about the promotion of our best historic values, which you alluded to with regards to economic freedom, but also with regards to civil liberties, and how openness, I really do believe, at 11:34 p.m. at night, can promote that. I firmly believe. I wrote in, and again, a friendly edit. If you wish to revise, that's 100% fine, sir. Before the section on private sector business, whereas such connections would promote not only economic development, but promotion of our best historic values of freedom and liberty in Cuba. Is that something that you're comfortable with?
Yes, I would totally accept.
I appreciate it, sir. And then just out of curiosity, where do we find the 700,000 independent businesses? Is that? I was going to say, that's a lot of businesses.
It says nearly. It's in the, I forgot which report.
That's fine. That's fine. But with that, and thank you, sir, I'm amenable to it.
May I ask the question, logistically, do you want this brought back at the workshop with the changes, or because otherwise, because
I wrote it down, I can
I'll
give it
get
to
the
you.
language, but then we have to be able to, with that language, I'll just have to be able to get it to the chair to have him sign it before it can take effect.
We can't just accept it tonight.
I have it here written.
You have it rewritten.
I have my little words here.
Oh, but then it's not.
Do you want to take my empty one and add your words?
No, well, no.
Give it to
You can't. No, it has to be. It has to be typed. It has to be in a form where it's presented to the clerk. It is a public record that lasts in eternity.
Yes.
And it has to be numbered numerically, and it has to be in the pile of things that you sign at such a point. So if I knew that was coming, and certainly it's council's resolution. If Mr. Carlson, Councilman Carlson, if you have no objection, I'll make it happen, and we'll have to.
I can sign it tomorrow.
That'll be fine.
Yeah.
I'll do
Okay,
that
we don't have to
tomorrow.
bring it back up to vote.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah,
no,
so
you
that
don't have to
can
bring it back
for
for a
your
vote.
use. I have no problem with that.
I'll make sure that I will not leave tonight until that language is at the clerk's desk ready for your signature.
We have to vote on it as amended.
Yeah,
As
so-
amended.
So if you want to make the motion, sir.
Okay, I move that the resolution be approved.
Okay. Okay, we have a motion by Councilman Carlson, a second by Councilman, I believe it was Miranda. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you, sir. Yes, sir, thank you, sir. Oh, we have ending.
We have
new information, Councilman, did you have something separate? Well, let me, first Councilman Dingfeld or anything, sir? Okay, Councilman Goods.
We're motions now, right?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, won't believe it the time, I'm sorry. I'd like to make a motion to give the commendation to Mr. Levi Fleming, a dedicated community advocate in District 5. I will present this commendation to Mr. Fleming at a regular session council meeting on June 27th.
Okay.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilman Goods, a second by Councilman Citro. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Anything else, sir?
That's it.
Councilman Maniscalco?
Yes, sir, I'd like to make a motion to remove file number, was it E2, 2011-48 from the June 20th agenda. It was a presentation at the beginning of the meeting.
Yes, sir.
May it be more specific, please, because that file number may not relate to anything. Can you be more specific,
The
please?
property appraiser was gonna come and talk about the trim notices and
And-
whatnot.
and you're
it's
asking
not
to
able
remove from the
to-
agenda.
And I'm just removing from the agenda.
Thank you.
All right.
Yep. We have a motion by Councilman Maniscalco. Any seconds?
Second.
Okay, a second by Councilman Citro. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
And then in place of that, I'd like to invite for a short presentation, no more than 10 minutes, Senator Charlie Rodriguez from Puerto Rico. He wanted to address council.
Now, but before we do that, and that certainly is a valued guess, just to let y'all know, I was going to briefly say this, that on the 20th, if y'all take a look at your calendars, because I'll be honest with you, as a new chair, I never really paid attention to things like this. And I certainly want to have this gentleman here. I think that's a wonderful thing, Councilman.
Well, I took off the one
Oh, I
speaker and
know.
I'm replacing it. So
And I agree. In other words, what I would ask is, we have, excluding police officer of the month, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, including that, presentations, plus then the front porch ordinance, plus then affordable housing, and then we have to be done by 1:30. That's not, that 10 minutes isn't gonna do anything, but what I would ask is everyone just to, and look, I do lots of commendations, so it's just that unfortunately, and this is my error as the chair, we have a lot that day, so just to, if they all go, hey, that's great, God bless them, let's do it. But just for everyone to review. Councilman Dingfelder.
I can help. I'll defer the front porch staff report to another date. There's no urgency.
Okay, boom, that takes care of everything. Thank you, sir.
I don't know if it takes care of everything, but give me a date, an alternative date, Mr. Shelby. Sure.
August, we're pretty darn packed as well, I think.
Your next workshop is September 26th.
Is that something that's? Is that
September
okay?
26th is fine.
Okay, Councilman Dingfelder, very nice. We have a motion by Councilman Dingfelder, a second
Second.
by Councilman Citro. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, Councilman Maniscalco, do we have a second on his motion?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Councilman Maniscalco, a second by Councilman Citro. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Anything else, sir?
Nope.
Okay, Councilman Citro.
Councilman Goods, is Miss Representative Hart, Miss Diane Hart, doing all right, to the best of your
I
knowledge?
haven't had a final report. When I saw her this morning, she seemed like she was doing a little bit better, but I haven't got another report since then.
Thank you. Godspeed to her. Nothing, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Councilman Miranda?
Although I wasn't going to put any, I remembered that two things. Jesuit boys won the state baseball championship, and the University of Tampa won the Division II national championship. So I'd like to make a combination of both of them at a later date.
Yes, sir. We have a motion by Councilman Miranda, a
This other
second.
thing, that's why I said at a later date.
A second by Councilman Maniscalco. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Anything else, sir? Councilman Carlson.
We set up, after you left last time, Mr. Chair, we set up a conversation about scooters, but I think we scheduled it on the last day of this month when I'm out of town. And I also, we've been handing feedback to the scooter companies, and they said they're working closely with staff to try to rectify some of the problems based on the feedback. And it would be better if we could schedule it in August or September to give them more time to resolve the issues.
How about late July?
Can we, do Do we have time in July, or?
I don't know. I haven't checked the calendar.
How about, I mean, well, I'll leave it to you, you're the maker of the motion.
No, I guess I would move that we move the date, but,
Maybe to a predetermined,
I was
to be
going to
determined.
originally to push it early, but if you're not gonna be here, then.
Scooters.
For that.
I think it's the last day of, the last Thursday of this month.
Yeah, 27.
I mean, how about toward the end of July?
When do we have time in late July or August?
It's a staff report, it's not a workshop.
You have a July meeting.
Well, I think,
Regular
the
meeting.
intention-
I'm sorry, on the 18th of July. Your next meeting after that is August 1st.
Is August 1st, okay? Okay.
Okay.
I move that we move it to August 1st.
Well, motion by
Second.
Councilman Carlson, the second by Councilman Dingfelder, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Anything else, sir?
That's it.
Okay, and I just want to wish, if I may, everyone a happy Father's Day for everybody.
Same
And to your fathers, if they're still here with us. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry to interrupt,
No,
but
you're
I
fine.
did notice that the calendar has the mayor's budget presentation on August 1st, but it has an unknown time. Traditionally, it's at 9 a.m. So would you like to correct the calendar to have that reflect 9 a.m. on the
Sure.
August 1st of the mayor's budget presentation?
Shall we have a motion for that?
9 a.m. 2.
No.
What? I'm sorry.
9 a.m. 1.
We have a
Oh, I just did. I'm sorry.
Did you have?
I had a comment on that.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, sir.
I just wanted to, I've asked staff this already, but maybe just codify it here. That when the mayor makes her presentation, of course, she's welcome to leave if she wishes, that's her prerogative, but just a request from council that senior staff remain to answer any questions. Because apparently, there's been some confusion on that in the past.
In the past, you're right.
So if as a body, we could make that request, formalize that request to add to that motion of 9 a.m., respectfully request that the mayor leave her senior staff behind to answer questions.
Okay, we have a motion, I guess, by Councilman Dingfelder. A second by whom?
Me.
By Councilman
I'm sorry.
Citro.
The motion is
I'm
to
have a time certain.
Time certain at 9 a.m. on that date. What is it?
August 1st, 2019, the mayor's fiscal year 2020 budget presentation to be set for 9 a.m.
And then tag on my respectfully also request that the mayor leave her senior staff behind to answer any questions.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Anything else? Okay, motion to receive and file.
Second.
Motion to receive and file.
Third.
I don't know by whom. I don't know seconded by whom. All in favor? Any opposed?
I moved it, Mr. Dingfelder seconded.
There you go. Yeah, I guess we have to have that. Thank you. Yes, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you to all the staff for waiting around with us.
Amen.